Okay, welcome to a brief overview of the art history study guide for the midterm. Make sure you understand the concept of hierarchical scale. Remember, it's sort of like a business hierarchy. The largest thing on the image is going to be the most important, or the top thing, or both in the image is going to be the most important. Okay, so usually the king or the pharaoh is going to be the largest or on the top of an image. Post and lintel, that's the two posts with the beam across the top. That was megalith is basically a large stone that we use to create a monument or a temple. A tumulus or tumuli is that, earthen covered mound that usually serves as a tomb. A henge is any circular formation of rocks or wooden beams that creates a monument. The Code of Hammurabi, which is really the first set of codified laws that were written down that everyone from king to peasant were supposed to follow. Shamash was the god that the king received the laws from. The Lamassu is that head, that bull or that lion sculpture body with the man's head that guarded the Assyrian palaces, usually sported 5 legs so that it looked like it was in movement from one side, either from the side or from the front. A ziggurat is that stepped sort of a temple and civic center complex that would have been in the Mesopotamian area. Load-bearing architecture is where you make a pile. Think of the pyramids, the Tulum or Chichen Itza sort of Aztec pyramids. The ziggurats are all load-bearing architecture. And then just sort of know the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, and the Babylonians as far as who's responsible for which types of architecture. And a stele or stela is that upright wooden slab that usually was meant to be viewed from one side, okay? And it usually has very low or B-A-S, relief carving on it. From Manoah, the labrys is that double-headed axe image and symbol that was actually first equated with female power. The King Minos and the Minotaur. Corbelled vault system, how that actually was worked and made from, oh gosh, even from Newgrange all the way through Mycenae, where you actually stacked and the weight of the stones actually created the way that the structure was made. Repoussé is when that metal work that was perfected in Mycenae, where you actually hammered from behind in the metal, the sheet metal, and it created that sort of image or that pushed out formation of the face or whatever it is. Tholos is a tomb that is usually got a corbelled vault system in it, and you'd see it mostly in burial chambers of Mycenae. A megaron is it's in a palace at Mycenae, and it would have been the throne room. And a crater is that large urn or vase that was somewhat narrowed at the neck but wide, and it had 2 ears or 2 handles on it made for mixing wine and a little water. From ancient Egypt, that mastaba was that first sort of precursor to a pyramid that was 1 layer low, okay? It's an early form of Egyptian burial tombs, and they used that for like the lesser people. Benben was the name of that pyramidal formed stone that the sun god Re first appeared upon and actually gave the world light. A canon, a set of artistic laws, the goddess Ma'at, who was the goddess of judgment in the day, you'll see that in the parchments and things. She actually determines whether or not the pharaoh is worthy to become a god by weighing the heart. Imhotep was the architect that actually created the first real pyramid for King Djoser. A cartouche, remember, it's that sort of the pharaoh's logo. You all did it yourselves. Canopic jars stored the organs of the mummied person. The shabtis or ushabtis, were those little votive figures that actually the pharaoh or the dead could send out to do their bidding or become stand-ins or do errands or whatever. They were just little figurines that were buried with the rest of the food and accoutrements of the dead. The imagery of 9 in connection with the pharaoh. Remember, that sort of him bringing those symbolic 9 tribes that they sort of vanquished to become a major force of ancient Egypt. They actually are a symbol now that becomes the fact that the pharaoh is always bringing order to chaos as he stamps out, treads over, sails over, whatever the image is of those 9 things, whether it's 9 people, 9 boats, 9 whatever. And the Amarna period. Remember, that's when Akhenaten disposed of the entire religious system and artistic laws and enforced his own for about 20 years. Polykleitos, the inventor, if you want to call it, of that set of artistic, that canon of laws that created the Greek look, that mathematical proportional system that became the rules that all artists use to portray the human body in their search for perfection of the human body. Humanism and all of those ideas that are all very important to ancient Greece. Contrapposto is that stance and that walking sort of way that the hips and the shoulders ran opposite each other in the angle of their, so that makes it look like the human is actually moving a little bit more naturalistically. Ezekias is one of the black figure painters on the black figure Greek pottery. Kouros is the male version of sculpture. It's a youth, but a male, and the Kori are the female, and the Kori are always dressed in some sort of what they actually call Kore, the robe, that toga that's belted. The archaic smile of that period, Praxiteles was going to be the sculptor late in Greece that's going to actually produce the first nude female form. And he's going to revolutionize the way that a lot of sculpture comes at the end of the ancient Greek. And some of the main Greek mythology ideas and the meander, that key design. The 7 steps of lost wax casting. The slide coming in will have all the listed there. The basic terms behind a Greek temple. The peristyle is that outdoor colonnade system that surrounded it. The 3 column orders. The stylobates, the floor of the Greek temple. The cellas, the interior space that would have housed the sculpture. The shaft of the column is the main body. Caryatids are those columns that were actually sported the human figure as part of the shaft. The pediment is the part up near the top that goes around the outer parts of the temple that would have had carvings on it and lower and high relief sculpture. And the capital, of course, is the very top of the column that actually tells you what style it is, what order it is. And the 2 basic ideas of the Greek face painting. Black figure is where the black figure is actually, if the figures are actually black. And that's the earlier version. The red figure comes later, and that's where it's a reverse. And the red figure, the figures are all red, and it allows the artist for more sensitivity and freedom in its portrayal of the figures. Know this. Just need to know the basic story. And when you look up these stories, there's usually some sort of Greek moral or some sort of lesson that's part of it. And a lot of it's tied up with the idea of that a lot of times humans are often making themselves more important or impinging upon the god's powers. Whether Icarus tries to fly or somebody's too proud, like Niobe, she pays a dear price for her pride. That's all. There's usually some sort of lesson, not always, but usually some sort of lesson with this myth. There's the lost wax casting method. Here is the floor plan for the Greek temple. Remember, it's based on a lot of mathematical systems. And here's one of the black figure paintings from Ezekiel. And here is the red figure painting from Euripides. Notice the three-quarter view in the central figure. That's one of the reasons why red figure painting could allow more sensitivity in how these guys are portrayed. Notice how these almost look three-dimensional, these figures, the way they're moving in space. We actually get a little bit more breathing room in space compared to the earlier piece where everything's still very flat looking as far as the human portrayal. All right, the first landscape ever painted that we know of so far in the world was here from Çatalhöyük. And it shows the volcano in the background and those black squares with the white squares inside of them. That's actually the overhead view of the town. So we've got sort of this weird flipping up of the space, but it is actually the first landscape ever known. Hieroglyphics. At the top, we could finally decipher hieroglyphics because at the top register, we see the hieroglyphics. The middle register, we've got the Demotic, which is sort of everyday Egyptian. And at the bottom is Greek. And they all would have been, the Greek would have been translated in the Demotic and on and on and on. So they could follow and actually be able to decipher what the hieroglyphics meant. The Stele of Hammurabi. We already talked about the laws that he's receiving from Shamash, but what's important stylistically about this is that Shamash is seated and Hammurabi is standing. He's receiving the laws. That's what that well, looks like a spear almost in the god's hands. That's actually a rolled up parchment. And it's important that he is not Hammurabi is not kneeling in front of the god like you'd think you would be in front of a god to show your proper respect for him or her, but he's standing upright. And that's important. It shows that he's maybe not as important powerfully or as the god, but that they're sort of on somewhat equal footing as he receives and that sort of gives him the air of legitimacy and even more power. He's sort of in with the god. We're connected. We're close, if you understand what I'm saying, in rank and sort of like almost like a personal relationship. Okay, it's important that he is standing to receive it, even though he's still, properly respectful. He's still kind of equating himself a little bit more with the god by standing upright instead of kneeling. The Phaistos disc. This is from Manoah, and it's a written language called Linear A, but it's actually the first actual printed text that has ever been seen in the world because they actually printed it into the clay. The Venus of Willendorf. The large breast and ponderous belly. This is to emphasize the fact that her femaleness, the fact that she is the birth mother. Fertility would have been extremely important at this time, and there are lots of these small votive figures. They're small partially because they're meant to be sort of like talismans or magical figures that were used in ceremonies and rites. But I think too is that, remember, the cavemen at this time and would have been mobile, sort of transitory, moving from cave to cave and place to place, and they needed to carry their artwork with them. That small nature of this piece is important because they're going to have to be able to move with it. This is from Çatalhöyük. Again, another female fertility figure. But here she's, with the large breasts and the ponderous belly. But here she's also seated with two leopards, which means that she's got a little bit more power. A leopard or a large cat, lions, they're all power animals, seen as powerful animals. So she's more almost like a little bit more enthroned, a little bit more powerful here. And then the snake goddess from Mesopotamia. She is not Mesopotamia, Minoa. She is also a goddess and a power figure. Again, the leopard on top of her head, two snakes in either hand. We still see the breast totally exposed. Her femaleness is still important, but she still has magical, powerful properties. Newgrange. This is a tumulus, but it's also meant to be more than that because it does receive on the solstices light coming through the roof box at the front, and it's meant for ceremonial purposes as well as more than just a tomb. Okay, they have found bodies here, but mostly it's meant for a ceremonial purpose. And there would have been gatherings here, and there would have been all kinds of celebrations here and trade, and that corbelled system of architecture is featured here. This is also a tumulus. Even though it's called the treasury of Atheists, it's really a tholos, and a tumulus here from Mycenae. Same corbelled architectural system, a little bit more refined. The stones are cut a little bit finer, but it's still essentially just a large tomb chamber. And it continues to be the largest one in history until Rome. So that's almost 1,500 years later. That's important. And there's the specs on how large it was. This is the palette, the victory stele of Naram Sin. And we see him at the very top of the piece, marching, vanquishing his enemies at the bottom. And he is wearing the horns of power. We see the three sons and gods above him. This is a hierarchical scale, okay? And even though it's on a slightly diagonal format, like he's marching towards the mountain, of course, the higher you are first of all, he's the largest, so he's the most important, he's the most powerful. But he's also the closest physically to the gods, whether it's in ziggurats or pyramids from ancient Egypt. Anybody who's at the top, to get physically higher even on those temples, got you closer to God. You're going to see that later on in art. This is a scroll from the Book of the Dead, and it shows literally a judgment going on. This pharaoh has obviously passed because Ma'at, who is sitting underneath the scale right at the middle, has determined that this person has a heart that's lighter than a feather. If he had not passed, that goddess sitting there next to her with the crocodile head was Amit, A-M-M-I-T. She would have devoured his heart right then on the spot. But it shows the absolute hallmark, the entire scroll, of how figures were portrayed as well, with that strange stance where we get the full shoulders, the face in the profile, the hips and feet in profile. They are interested in showing the best parts, if you want to call it, the best features of the human form. And it's all set by that palette of Naram Sin, which we saw in the earlier slide. Oh, excuse me, that's not right. It's in the palette of King Narmer. Scratch that. The palette of King Narmer sets the artistic style for the ancient Egyptians, and this is just a perfect example of it. Here it is, the palette of King Narmer. We see the unification of both the upper and lower Egypt. He's got both crowns, one on one side. He's got that domed conical one of upper, and the other side of where you see him a little bit smaller on that top register there. He's got that one of Lower Egypt on there. Eventually, pharaohs will wear both at once. The two sort of long-necked things, those are, again, a unification symbol since the necks are intertwined. We watch him unifying, conquering his people and unifying them. There we go. The pyramids of Giza. The very top of this would have been the Ben stone. And we've got Khufu, was the earliest and the largest pyramid. Khafre, again, the next one, and the next smallest one. And Menkaure, the smallest one and the newest pyramid, okay? Tombs for the gods. Well, the pharaohs who would be gods, which they would both exit and enter on a daily way. This is a great example. You can call it King Menkaure and his queen, okay, rather than trying to massacre that poor name of that queen. King Menkaure here and his queen. This is a perfect example of Egyptian sculpture. The pharaoh, of course, is the largest. He's absolutely perfect in his skin and his formation. He's fully frontal, facing us, with one foot in front of the other. That is the foot of power. That stance is meant to make you think, power, I'm claiming. He looks very stiff. She holds him, his queen, and she as well has a small foot in front of herself. She's a queen after all, but she, again, perfect. No blemishes, no skin folds hardly, ageless. And they're also portrayed with a certain number of cubits high and wide. There was a mathematical set of artistic laws that not only governed painting, but also sculpture for the ancient Egyptians. And that is a canon of artistic laws. They look stiff, they look powerful, but they look eternal. And that's important because this is going to be a god. And he needs to be perfect, needs to be eternal, and he needs to be powerful. And this is that portrayal. This is from early Greece. This is a Kouros, and he's got a little bit of that archaic smile, that sort of smiling with the mouth closed sort of thing that was going on in ancient Greece in sculpture. He's fully frontal as well. Remember, the Greeks are looking at Egypt, and they definitely know each other very well. And they have decided, though, to free the body, though, from that back part that we see from Menkaure's sculpture, and we'll see in all Egyptian sculpture, because they're trying to attain a more natural-looking figure moving in space. This is just a youth. It's not a particular portrait of any particular person, but notice that his legs look almost like they're taken directly from ancient Egypt. It's fully frontal, much like ancient Egypt. His hands are close in the way that they're positioning to ancient Egypt. The hair is patterned almost in the way it's portrayed. That mask-like set of eyes and nose, again. The Greeks are still finding their way to what they're trying to get to physically, artistically in sculpture. And so here we have it. This is what they were trying to get to. The Doryphoros of Polykleitos. This is what's going to set the standard for ancient Greek art. That mathematical system of laws and proportions and that contrapposto pose make this human body look ideal to the Greek sensibilities. He is symmetrical in his musculature, is perfectly smooth. He is not a particular person. He is an ideal. Remember, they're all related to that idea of perfection, harmony, beauty, and the ideal as it relates to humanism. The idea of the perfection possible, the beauty in mankind of all different things, whether it's in its physical form, intellectually, athletically, artistically, etc. Intellectually. Hello, Mr. Praxiteles. This is completely breaking with Greek tradition. First of all, she's nude, and that is completely unheard of. She's also just getting ready to step in or out of the bath, which is sort of a human everyday sort of event. And this would have made her seem a little bit more accessible. Her skin and her way she is a little bit more sensual and sensuous. This was almost, this piece was considered quite scandalous by the ancient Greeks. I put these two together because you might see them in combination with others. This early piece above is sort of a nice transitional piece between the old archaic vision of how to portray the human figure and a transition to Polydoros's the Doryphoros of Polykleitos. That later piece. We see this gentleman here dying, and he seems to actually be moving in a much more naturalistic way. Even the way his muscles are sculpted and defined look a little bit more realistic and a little less stylized, and he actually is sort of responding to what's happened to him. He's actually looking down and actually falling in somewhat of a natural way that a human body would, as opposed to this dying Gaul here at the bottom. This is the very late ancient Greece. This isn't even a Greek that's being portrayed here. This is actually a Gaelic, or excuse me, a Celtic, someone from the British Isles who is a warrior who's died fighting against the Greeks. And he is looks quite human, very detailed, and all of the hair, even the rope around the neck, which they would have worn, the blood gushing from the wound. He actually responds in a very human, natural way to his injuries. Everything is totally, and he's not at all cool and removed at all. This is it's a Roman copy, but it's a very sort of, I won't say loving, but a very respectful portrait of an enemy. And of course, we see that same sort of late Greek Hellenistic period sort of portrayal of the human again. Here, this tired boxer gladiator figure. He's not a god anymore. He's not an ideal, although he's physically very fit. He looks tired. He looks worn. He looks beaten. He's even got a furrowed brow, and he's actually got a facial expression. The nose has been broken. The hands have been brutalized. You get the feeling that he's tired, and this is a complete break. That emotional charge of these later pieces is completely new to Greek art.